The stars above the Kareth expanse did not shine the way stars were supposed to. They flickered, not with the natural rhythm of burning fusion, but with something uneven, something tired, like a pulse that had been going on for far too long. Ancient observatories had once catalogued them as stable, predictable, safe. That had been before the war. Now, entire constellations dimmed and brightened in irregular patterns, their light interrupted by the slow drift of debris fields, shattered fleets, and the cold remains of worlds that no longer had names anyone bothered to remember. For 37 years, the war had spread across the expanse. Not in sudden bursts, not in dramatic conquests, but in a slow, grinding expansion that never seemed to stop. Systems did not fall in a day. They weakened, they strained, they held for months, sometimes years, until one day they didn't. Until one day the last transmission went silent, the last defense grid failed, and another piece of the map turned dark. No one marked those systems anymore. There were too many. Commander Ralvek stood alone on the observation deck of the cruiser Silent Accord, watching the edge of one such system flicker out on the tactical display. No alarms sounded. No one spoke. There was no urgency left for moments like this. A junior officer quietly updated the map. A small section shifted color, from contested to lost. No ceremony. No announcement. Just a change in data. Ralvek didn't move. He had seen that same shift hundreds of times. Each one meant billions. Cities that had burned. Oceans that had boiled. Populations that had fled too late or nowhere at all. But the war did not care about numbers. It never had. Behind him, the low hum of the ship's systems continued as if nothing had changed. Engines cycled. Life support adjusted. Data streams flowed endlessly across consoles where officers tracked movements they could no longer meaningfully influence. The war had reached a point where victory was no longer discussed. Only delay. How long? Someone had asked in a strategy briefing 3 weeks ago. Not how do we win? Not where do we strike? Just, how long can we hold? No one had answered, because everyone already knew. Ralvek exhaled slowly, his breath fogging faintly against the cool glass of the observation barrier. Out there, beyond the drifting wreckage and fading stars, something was still coming. It had been coming for decades. They did not call it an empire. Empires had borders. Empires negotiated. Empires could be reasoned with, delayed, even broken from within. This was none of those things. The first recorded contact had come from a mining outpost on the outer edge of the Kareth expanse. A routine report, unidentified vessels entering system space. No response to hails. No recognizable formation patterns. Then silence. By the time a patrol fleet arrived 3 days later, there was nothing left to investigate. The outpost was gone. Not destroyed in the way stations usually were. No scattered debris, no radiation bloom, no fractured hulls drifting in orbit. Just absence. Sensors had struggled to explain it. Matter readings suggested the station had not been blown apart. It had been taken. That was 37 years ago. Since then, the thing they now called the Narathi swarm had expanded steadily inward, system by system, layer by layer, consuming everything in its path. No one knew where it had come from. No one had ever seen its origin point. And no one had ever successfully communicated with it. Attempts had been made, of course. At first, the Conclave had assumed intelligence meant familiarity. They had sent signals in mathematical sequences, in universal constants, in structured language patterns designed to establish baseline understanding. The swarm had responded, but not in any way that could be translated. The signals came back distorted, layered, recursive, like echoes folding in on themselves. Some analysts believed it was an attempt at communication. Others believed it was something closer to processing. After the 5th attempt, all diplomatic channels were abandoned. Not because they failed, but because the swarm arrived during the 6th. What made the Narathi truly impossible to fight was not their strength. It was their nature. They did not operate as individuals. Captured battlefield recordings showed units moving in perfect synchronization without visible command structures. No hesitation, no confusion, No delay between stimulus and response. A defensive line would adjust its formation before the attack even fully materialized. Ambushes failed because the swarm already moved as if it expected them. Retreats failed because escape routes were intercepted before they were chosen. It was not prediction. It was something faster, something deeper. And then there were the numbers. Every species in the conclave had limits, production capacity, population thresholds, logistical constraints that defined how long they could sustain conflict. The Narathai did not appear to share those limits. Destroy 10,000 units, and the next wave would arrive larger. Destroy a fleet, and within weeks another would emerge with modified configurations, different armor layering, adjusted weapon dispersal, altered movement patterns. They did not just replace losses. They improved after them. Entire research divisions had been dedicated to understanding their growth cycle. None of them agreed on a conclusion. Some believed the swarm harvested raw planetary matter and converted it directly into new units. Others argued that the production centers were mobile, hidden somewhere beyond mapped space. A minority, one that was quietly ignored, suggested something far worse, that the swarm itself was not expanding, that it had always been this size. And what the galaxy was experiencing was simply its attention turning. Commander Ralvek had fought them 12 times. He had never seen the same battle twice. On his third engagement, the swarm deployed heavy assault forms, towering constructs that absorbed kinetic fire and advanced without slowing. On his fifth, those units were gone, replaced by smaller, faster organisms that bypassed shields entirely using focused energy bursts. On his eighth, they did not attack at all. They waited 3 full days, holding position just outside engagement range, forcing his fleet to maintain combat readiness until exhaustion set in. When the attack finally came, it was not stronger. It was simply timed perfectly. They did not fight to win battles. They fought to end resistance. "They don't think," one officer had said during a debrief. Ralvek had corrected him. "No," he had said quietly, eyes still on the tactical replay. "They think. Just not in a way we recognize." The worst part, the part no one liked to say out loud, was that the swarm did not hate them. There was no cruelty in their actions. No hesitation, no enjoyment, no sign of intent beyond execution. Worlds were stripped the same way storms stripped coastlines. Without anger, without purpose anyone could understand. They called it the Conclave. 7 civilizations, bound not by trust, but by necessity. The alliance had not been formed out of hope. It had been formed out of timing. Each species had encountered the Narathai swarm separately, in different regions at different stages of expansion. At first, each believed it was an isolated crisis, manageable, containable, something that could be studied and eventually defeated. That illusion lasted until the borders began to touch. When the first refugee fleets crossed into neighboring territories, carrying identical reports, identical losses, the pattern became impossible to ignore. This was not a localized threat. It was a direction, and it was moving toward all of them. The Conclave's founding summit had been efficient. There had been no speeches about unity, no declarations of shared destiny, just data, projected casualty curves, territory loss simulations, extinction probabilities. The conclusion had been simple enough that no one argued it. Alone, they would all fall. Together, they might last longer. Each member brought something different. The Varellan combined contributed fleet mass, thousands of ships, heavily armored, designed for sustained engagements. The Threxian clades offered ground superiority, genetically optimized soldiers capable of surviving environments most species couldn't even enter. The Asari provided predictive modeling. Their simulations could map entire battlefields down to probability chains that extended hours into the future. The Doran Syndicate controlled logistics, supply lines, resource distribution, the quiet infrastructure that made prolonged war possible. The Kethari lent their long-range weapon systems, capable of striking targets across planetary distances. The Ulari brought diplomacy, what little of it remained useful. And the last member, Ralvek's people, contributed strategy. Or at least they used to. In the early years, it had almost worked. The Conclave established defensive perimeters across key systems, layered fleets in overlapping formations, and used the Isari models to anticipate swarm movements before they fully developed. For a time, they slowed it. Not stopped. Slowed. And that had been enough to create something dangerous. Hope. Ralvek remembered those briefings. Charts showing stabilized front lines. Simulations projecting possible containment zones. Words like turning point used cautiously but used nonetheless. He remembered believing them. That was the first mistake. Because the swarm adapted. It always adapted. Defensive perimeters that had held for months began to fail in days. Fleet formations that once minimized losses were suddenly exploited with surgical precision. Supply lines, once considered untouchable, were intercepted and dismantled before they could be reinforced. The Isari simulations began returning conflicting outcomes. Then incomplete ones. Then none at all. For the first time in their recorded history, the Isari predictive engines encountered a problem they could not resolve. Too many variables changing too quickly. The war shifted, not suddenly, but unmistakably. Where the conclave had once dictated engagements, now they reacted. Where they had once reinforced strongholds, now they evacuated them. Where they had once planned offensives, now they calculated withdrawals. Strategic repositioning, the official reports called it. No one used that phrase outside the briefings. Everywhere else it had a simpler name. Retreat. Refugee fleets became constant. Not occasional, not rare, constant. Endless lines of vessels carrying what remained of entire civilizations, arriving at whatever stations still functioned, overcrowding them beyond capacity. Different species, different atmospheres, different needs, all with the same story. They came. We held. We lost. Ralvek had walked through those docking bays once. Just once. That had been enough. Creatures that had never left their home systems now drifting without direction. Military units reduced to escort duty, guarding what little remained of populations they could no longer protect. Children, different shapes, different forms, but unmistakably the same. Staring out of transport windows at a sky that was not theirs. He had not gone back. Not because it wasn't important, but because it was. The conclave still held meetings. They still exchanged data, still adjusted strategies, still spoke in the language of control. But something had changed in those rooms. It wasn't said directly. It didn't need to be. Every new report carried the same quiet implication. Nothing was working. 6 systems lost in 4 months. Then 9 in 3. Then entire sectors destabilized faster than they could even be mapped. The projections stopped including victory scenarios. Then they stopped including containment scenarios. Eventually, they only tracked time. How long do we have? That question returned. Not as speculation, as priority. Ralvek sat in one of those meetings now, surrounded by representatives of species that had once seemed unshakable. None of them looked unshakable anymore. Some had lost homeworlds. Some had lost entire populations. Some had lost so much that their presence in the room felt theoretical, like echoes of something that had already ended. A Varellan commander leaned forward, his voice low. "We cannot continue like this." No one disagreed. Another spoke. "We reinforce the inner systems, collapse the outer lines, focus everything on survivability." "We've tried that," someone else replied. "They breach concentrated defenses faster than distributed ones now. We increase production." "With what resources?" The Doran representative cut in sharply. "Half our extraction zones are gone. Then we strike back. Full offensive. Everything we have." Silence followed that suggestion, because everyone in the room knew what everything meant now. And it wasn't enough. Ralvek did not speak immediately. He listened, watched, measured the room the way he had once measured battlefields, looking for patterns, for openings, for something that had been missed. There was nothing, and that, more than anything, was the problem. Finally, he exhaled slowly and said the only thing that still felt true. "Everything we know how to do," he said, voice steady, "is failing." No one interrupted him. "We've adapted our formations, changed our strategies, reinforced our systems. Every response we have, they've already solved. He let that settle. Then, quieter. We are fighting this war with rules that no longer apply. That was the moment the room shifted. Not visibly, not dramatically, but something changed. Because for the first time, the problem wasn't framed as, how do we win? But, what if we can't the way we are? The silence after Ralvek's words did not feel like disagreement. It felt like recognition, not of a solution, but of a boundary they had finally reached. For several minutes, no one in the chamber spoke. Data continued to scroll across the central display, loss projections, system degradation curves, fleet readiness percentages, but no one looked at them anymore. They had all seen those numbers before. They all knew where they ended. It was the Isari delegate who moved first. Quietly, deliberately, he extended a slender hand toward the central console and pulled up a file that had not been accessed in over a decade. The display shifted. The war maps disappeared. In their place appeared a single planetary system. Unremarkable. A mid-sized star. Stable output. No anomalies. Third planet from the core blue, green, cloud-covered. Habitable. Developed. Occupied. Several of the delegates frowned. Not in confusion. In dismissal. Ralvek recognized the system immediately, though he had not thought about it in years. "Why are you showing us this?" the Varellan commander asked. The Isari did not answer right away. Instead, he expanded the file. More data filled the display, population estimates, technological assessments, historical summaries. All of it average, or slightly below. "This system," the Isari said finally, "belongs to a species we evaluated 112 years ago for potential conclave observation status." A pause. They were rejected. A faint shift of posture moved through the room. Not interest. Not yet. Just acknowledgement. "Reason?" someone asked. The Isari answered without looking up from the data. "Instability." He began listing points, each one appearing on the display as he spoke. "High frequency of internal conflict. Fragmented governance structures. Emotional decision-making patterns. Short average lifespan. Technological advancement curve. Rapid, but inconsistent." Another pause. Then, they were assessed as unlikely to contribute meaningfully to large-scale interstellar stability. A soft, almost humorless sound came from one side of the chamber. "Then why?" the Doran representative said. "Are we looking at them now?" The Isari finally looked up. And for the first time since the meeting began, there was something in his expression that wasn't neutral. It wasn't hope. It wasn't confidence. It was something closer to reconsideration. "Because," he said carefully, "they are the only variable in our records that does not fit the model." That got attention. Not much, but enough. Ralvek leaned forward slightly. "Explain." The Isari adjusted the display again. The planetary view shifted into a series of smaller windows, archived reports, fragmented encounter logs, scattered data points collected over decades. None of them had been considered important at the time. Now, placed together, they formed a pattern that felt incomplete, but persistent. Initial contact scenarios were limited. The Isari began. Exploration vessels, trade attempts, minor territorial disputes. He paused, as if choosing his next words more carefully than usual. In most cases, these interactions followed a predictable sequence. The display highlighted one of the reports. Assessment of the species as manageable. Application of pressure, economic, territorial, or military. Expected compliance. Another pause. Then deviation. Ralvek's eyes narrowed slightly. Define deviation. The Isari didn't answer directly. Instead, he opened the first report. A small survey fleet from a minor conclave-aligned species had encountered a human colony at the edge of an unclaimed system. The fleet had superior numbers, superior weapons, clear territorial advantage. Standard procedure had been followed. A demand was issued. Withdrawal expected. "They did not withdraw," the Isari said. The report continued. Initial resistance was minimal, then escalated. then changed. Tactical behavior became unpredictable, the Asari said. Engagement patterns did not follow any established doctrine. The next line appeared on the display. Outcome: inconclusive. Colony remains active. Survey fleet withdrew. A second report replaced it. A trade consortium had attempted to manipulate resource flow from a human-controlled system. Blockade. Price pressure. Standard economic leverage. They adapted, the Asari said. Not militarily. Strategically. They rerouted supply chains, increased production, undermined the consortium's dependencies. Within a decade, the pressure had reversed. Outcome: consortium losses significant. Human control of region strengthened. A third report, shorter, less detailed. A civilian transport vessel, intercepted by a mixed-species pirate group. Assessed as low risk. Easy target. The report ended abruptly. Outcome: no survivors. Pirate group not encountered again. Silence settled over the chamber. Not heavy. Not dramatic. Just present. These are isolated incidents, the Varellan commander said after a moment. Irregular responses are not uncommon among developing species. Yes, the Asari agreed. But the pattern is not in the events themselves. He gestured to the collection of reports. It is in the transition. Ralvek watched the display carefully. Transition from what? The Asari met his gaze. From predictable to not. That answer did not satisfy the room. It wasn't supposed to. They are inconsistent, the Doran representative said flatly. That is not a strength. That is a liability. Correct, the Asari said. Then why are we discussing them? This time the Asari did not hesitate. Because the Narathai swarm is not defeating us through strength. He let that settle. It is defeating us through prediction. No one spoke, because that part was true. It learns our patterns, he continued. Our strategies, our limits. It identifies the point at which we break. And it applies pressure there. Another pause. Then, quieter. We have no evidence that it has encountered something that does not present a stable pattern. Ralvek felt something shift in his thinking. Not a solution. Not yet. But the outline of one. You're suggesting, he said slowly, that unpredictability itself could be an advantage. I am suggesting, the Asari replied, that a system which cannot be modeled, cannot be easily countered. The Varellan commander shook his head. They're unstable, divided, emotion-driven. You said it yourself. Yes, the Asari didn't look away. And they are still there. That landed differently. For the first time since the meeting began, the room wasn't thinking about what had been lost. It was thinking about something that hadn't been. Ralvek leaned back slightly, eyes still on the small blue-green world rotating slowly on the display. A species dismissed, a variable ignored, a pattern that refused to stay predictable. We've never approached them? He asked. No, the Asari said. They were deemed irrelevant. Ralvek studied the planet for a long moment. Then quietly, maybe that's the point. No one responded immediately, but this time the silence felt different. The chamber did not erupt into debate. It should have. A proposal built on uncertainty, on incomplete data and dismissed evaluations, should have triggered resistance from every corner of the conclave. Instead, the reaction was slower, measured, careful, because for the first time in a long while, the idea on the table wasn't something they had already tried. They're untested, the Varellan commander said finally. In this context, in this scale, everything is untested against the swarm, the Doran representative replied quietly. No one disagreed with that. Ralvek remained focused on the rotating image of the distant world. From this distance it looked calm, untouched. No visible scars of war. No defensive arrays orbiting its surface. No sign that it had ever faced anything like what was coming. It looked ordinary. Even if we consider this, another delegate said. What exactly are we expecting? Reinforcements? Strategy? They've never engaged in conflict at this scale. They've engaged in conflict constantly, the Asari corrected. A few glances shifted toward him. That's part of the problem, the Varellan commander said. They fight each other. That doesn't translate to. It might, the Asari interrupted more sharply than before. Or it might not. But we are no longer in a position to discard variables simply because they do not fit our expectations. Silence followed again. But this time it wasn't passive. It was weighing. At the far end of the chamber, a figure who had not spoken until now shifted slightly. Elder Tereth. Old even by the standards of his long-lived species. He had been present at the founding of the conclave. Had overseen conflicts long before the Narathai swarm had ever been encountered. And, more importantly, he had seen the humans. I have, Tereth said quietly. The room turned. Ralvek's gaze sharpened. You've had direct contact? Tereth nodded once. Brief, limited, but sufficient. He moved slowly, placing a small data shard onto the central console. I did not think it relevant at the time. The display shifted again. Not to fleet movements, not to strategic overlays, but to a recording. A small vessel. Human design crude by conclave standards. Uneven plating. Non-standardized structure. It lacked the symmetry most advanced species considered essential for efficiency. It looked improvised. Our patrol ship encountered it 81 years ago, Tereth said. It had crossed into restricted space. We attempted standard containment procedures. The recording advanced. The conclave vessel was larger, better armed, positioned with clear advantage. What happened? Someone asked. Tereth did not answer immediately. The recording showed the human ship receiving the transmission. A pause. Then movement. Not retreat. Not compliance. They didn't respond according to any known engagement logic, Tereth said. The human vessel accelerated. Directly toward the patrol ship. Several delegates leaned forward. That's not evasion, the Varellan commander said. No, Tereth replied. It isn't. The footage became unstable, weapon fire, abrupt maneuvers, sensor interference. But one thing remained clear. The human ship did not behave defensively. It did not attempt to escape. Closed distance. Aggressively. Relentlessly. Our ship was destroyed, Tereth said simply. Silence. We had superior range. Superior shielding. Superior firepower. He let each word land. They had none of those advantages. Ralvek's eyes remained fixed on the recording. Then how? They did not disengage, Tereth said. That answer hung in the air. They took damage that should have forced withdrawal, he continued. They ignored it. They rerouted power in ways that compromised long-term stability but increased immediate output. The recording showed the moment clearly. The human vessel, already damaged, accelerating again. Pushing past what should have been safe operational limits. They became more effective, Tereth said quietly. As the situation worsened, no one spoke, because that was not how intelligent systems behaved. Survivor reports from our vessel were consistent, Tereth added. He brought up a final log entry, a fragment of text. They did not react to pressure the way any species should. The closer we came to ending them, the more dangerous they became. Another line followed. Shorter. Do not push them to the edge. There is something there that does not break. Tereth looked around the chamber slowly. His voice, when he spoke again, was quieter than before. One of my officers used a different phrase in their final report. The display shifted one last time. Do not let them feel like they are losing. A pause. Then the final line appeared. Because you will not recognize what answers you when they decide they are not. No one moved. The room, which had spent hours discussing numbers, projections, and probabilities, now had none of those things. Only a question. Ralvek exhaled slowly, his mind replaying the footage, the reports, the pattern that didn't fit. Unpredictable. Escalating. Non-linear. Not breaking under pressure. Becoming something else because of it. He looked again at the distant world on the display. still turning, still quiet, still untouched. "We've been asking the wrong question," he said finally. Several eyes turned toward him. "Not whether they can help us," he continued. A pause. "But whether we understand what we're asking for." This time no one disagreed, because for the first time since the war began, the unknown was no longer the enemy. The vote did not take long. It should have. A decision of that scale, contacting an untested species, inviting them into a war that had already consumed half the mapped expanse, should have required layers of review, extended deliberation, contingency modeling. That was how the conclave had always operated. Carefully, deliberately, predictably. But the war had taken most of those options away. 4 in favor, 3 against. No abstentions. Passed. No one celebrated. There was no sense of relief, no shift in the weight pressing down on the chamber. Because everyone understood what that vote actually meant. They were out of answers. The transmission was prepared within the hour. Not a demand. Not an order. A request. Carefully structured. Context included. Threat outlined in precise, measurable terms. An offer of alliance. Resource sharing. Territorial concessions. Everything the conclave could reasonably give, placed into a single message and directed toward a species they had once dismissed as irrelevant. Ralvek watched as the signal was encoded, triple-checked, then sent. It would take time to reach them, even with optimized relay paths, even with priority routing across every remaining functional network in the expanse. There would be delay. Hours, possibly days. That was expected. What was not expected was the reply. Came back in just under 3 hours. At first, the communications officer thought it was an error. A loop. Some kind of reflection artifact bouncing their own signal back at them. "It's inbound," she said, frowning at the console. "Origin matches target vector." Ralvek turned. "That's not possible." "It shouldn't be," she agreed. "But it is." The transmission was clean, direct. No encryption layers the conclave systems couldn't immediately parse. No diplomatic formatting. No extended preamble. Just a single line of text. The room went still. "That's incomplete," one of the delegates said. Before anyone could respond, a second data packet arrived. This one carried more information. Identifiers, command structures, movement logs. The header translated cleanly. Unified Earth Command. Ralvek felt a slight tightening in his chest. Not fear. Not yet. Something closer to attention. "Open it," he said. The rest of the message resolved across the display. Silence. No requests for clarification. No questions about the enemy. No negotiation of terms. "They didn't ask for anything," the Doran representative said slowly. "No," Ralvek replied. "I still on the message." "They didn't." Another pause. Longer this time. "They're already moving," someone added. That was the part that settled differently. The conclave had sent a request. A call for aid. A signal into uncertainty. And before that request had even fully crossed the distance between them, the response had already begun. "They committed before they had full data," the Varellan commander said. There was something in his tone now. Not dismissal. Not quite concern. Recognition. Or, the Asari said quietly, "They didn't need it." Ralvek considered that. Didn't need it. Not because they understood the situation, but because they had already decided how they would respond to it. He thought back to the warning. Do not let them feel like they are losing. A slow exhale. "They didn't wait," Ralvek said. And in that moment, something about the situation shifted. Not in the room. Not in the war. In understanding. For 37 years, the conclave had fought reactively. Analyzing. Modeling. Adjusting. Waiting for the right move. The species they had just contacted had not waited at all. For days. That was all the time between decision and arrival. For days to cross distances that most fleets would require weeks to navigate safely. For days to enter a war they did not fully understand. For days to commit force against an enemy that had broken every other civilization that had faced it. Ralvek turned away from the display and moved toward the observation deck once more. The stars outside hadn't changed. They still flickered, still dimmed unevenly under the weight of a war that refused to end. But somewhere out there, something new was moving, fast, direct, unquestioning. He found himself wondering, not for the first time, whether they had just called for help or unleashed something they did not fully comprehend. Behind him, the communications console chimed again. A minor update, automatically appended to the previous transmission. Ralvek didn't turn immediately. He already knew he would read it. When he did, it was even shorter than the first. No further authorization required. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the words. Then quietly, almost to himself, they were already coming. And for the first time since the war began, Ralvek wasn't thinking about how long they could hold. He was thinking about what would happen when something that didn't stop met something that didn't wait. They arrived early, not by a margin that could be dismissed as calculation error or minor efficiency. They arrived 21 hours ahead of schedule. The first human vessel tore into the outer edge of the Kareth expanse with a velocity that immediately triggered half a dozen safety violations across conclave monitoring systems. Docking control transmitted standard approach instructions. They were acknowledged, and then mostly ignored. "They're not decelerating correctly," the station officer said, voice tight as he watched the telemetry spike across his display. "They are decelerating," another replied. A pause. "Just not safely." Ralvek stood at the observation platform overlooking the main docking corridor as the fleet came into view. One ship, then three, then more sliding out of jump space in rapid succession, each one adjusting trajectory with sharp, efficient bursts rather than the smooth, calculated arcs conclave vessels preferred. His first impression was not power. It was wear. These were not pristine warships. They were not symmetrical, not polished, not designed with the aesthetic precision that most advanced species associated with technological superiority. They looked used. Hull plating mismatched in places, sections clearly replaced after damage. Scorch marks that had not been fully repaired. External structures that suggested modification over time rather than uniform construction. One of the larger carriers bore a long, darker strip across its side, an entire segment of its hull visibly newer than the rest, as if something had torn through it once and been rebuilt without concern for appearance. "They look," one of the junior officers began. Ralvek finished the thought quietly. "Like they've survived things." That was the difference. Most conclave fleets were built to avoid damage, to minimize loss, to maintain structural integrity across prolonged engagements. These ships did not look like they were built to avoid being hit. They looked like they were built to keep functioning after they were. And then he saw the weapons. Hardpoints across nearly every viable surface. Not evenly distributed. Not balanced. Placed at angles that made little defensive sense but maximized firing coverage in aggressive trajectories. "These designs," the tactical officer muttered behind him, "they're not optimized for survivability." "No," Ralvek said, eyes narrowing slightly. "They're optimized for ending the fight first." That realization settled in quietly, because it wasn't just a difference in engineering. It was a difference in philosophy. The docking sequence, if it could be called that, was fast, brutally efficient. Ships came in hard, cut velocity late, and locked into position with minimal transition time between arrival and readiness. No lingering, no extended calibration cycles. Within minutes, the first boarding ramp deployed. Ralvek moved to meet them. The human commander did not arrive with ceremony. No escort of honor guards. No display of rank or presence. Just 5 individuals stepping down from the transport vessel with the kind of awareness that immediately marked them as something different. They looked around, not in curiosity, not in awe, in assessment, eyes moving across the docking bay, tracking exits, elevations, personnel positioning, cataloging. The one at the front, General Elia Navarro, walked directly toward Ralvek without hesitation. She was smaller than he expected. Most of them were shorter, less physically imposing than many conclave species. But that impression didn't last long. There was something in the way she moved. Not cautious, not aggressive, certain. She extended a hand. Ralvek recognized the gesture from archived cultural briefings. He returned it. Her grip was firm. Not a display of dominance. Not a test. Just solid. "Commander Ralvek," she said. Her voice was steady. Level. Not warm. Not cold. Controlled. "General Navarro," he replied. "You arrived ahead of." "We don't like being late," she said, cutting in. Not rudely, just efficiently. That was the first interruption. It wouldn't be the last. "We'll need a briefing room," she continued. "Full tactical overview. Current front lines, known swarm concentrations, and your last 3 failed engagement models." Ralvek paused. Just slightly. "You want the failures?" he asked. Navarro nodded once. "Those matter more." That answer stayed with him. They moved quickly through the station corridors. The human team kept pace easily, their attention shifting constantly, not distracted but aware. One of them slowed briefly near a viewport, glancing out at the distant stars. "Quiet out here," he said. Another responded without looking. Not for long. There was no tension in the exchange. No visible stress. But there was something else. A kind of readiness. As if every one of them was already somewhere else. The briefing room had been prepared in advance. Data arrays active. Projections ready. Navarro didn't sit immediately. She stood at the edge of the table, looking over the assembled conclave officers one by one. Not sizing them up. Understanding them. Then she spoke. "I've got 3 questions," she said. No introduction. No formalities. First, where are they making more of themselves? Ralvek gestured to the display. Confirmed production zones, 11 primary sites. 3 heavily fortified. The rest. "I'll need the full data package," she said. He nodded. "Second," she continued, "where's their highest concentration right now?" A Morai officer answered. "System K, 47. Outer Moon, the Los Verge. Estimated 4 million ground units. Extensive orbital defenses." Navarro made a brief note on a thin handheld device. "Third," she said. She looked up. "Who do I talk to about rules of engagement?" The room went quiet. Ralvek answered carefully. "They don't recognize them. No treaties. No surrender protocols. No distinction between military and civilian targets." A pause. "There are no rules." Navarro held his gaze for a moment, then nodded. "Good," she said. It wasn't satisfaction. Not exactly. But it was clarity. Simplifies things. That was the moment something shifted again. Not in the room. Not visibly. But in the way the conclave officers looked at the humans. Because until that point, there had still been an assumption. That these were reinforcements. Allies. Another piece added to a failing system. But now, Ralvek wasn't entirely sure that was accurate anymore. Later, a liaison officer named Saran was assigned to observe the human fleet directly. To report back. To understand. His first reports were straightforward. They are organized. They are efficient. Their equipment, while visually irregular, is maintained to a high operational standard. Nothing unexpected. Nothing alarming. But by the 3rd day, the tone began to change. "They exhibit behavior prior to engagement that I do not fully understand," Saran wrote. Ralvek read the report twice. "They gather in small groups. They speak casually. They make jokes." Pause in the text. About death. About injury. About failure scenarios. Ralvek frowned slightly. Saran continued. "It does not appear to reduce their effectiveness. If anything, it increases it. Tension seems to convert into focus." Another report followed. "They assign names to their weapons." Ralvek blinked at that. "Individual units. Personal designations." I asked one soldier to explain. He said, "It helps. I am not certain what it helps with." The next report came hours later. Shorter. "They carry images with them. Inside their armor." A longer pause in the text this time. I asked why. The answer was personal. Ralvek leaned forward slightly as he read. So I remember what I'm fighting for. The report ended there. Ralvek sat back slowly. For the first time since the humans had arrived, he wasn't thinking about what they could do. He was thinking about why they did it. And that was far more difficult to understand. The target had been labeled untouchable for 9 years. The Los Verge, outer moon of the K-47 system. A gray, airless rock wrapped in layered defense grids and crawling with Narathi swarm activity. Every conclave strategist knew its profile. Orbital cannons positioned in overlapping arcs. Missile platforms embedded across the surface. Subsurface tunnel networks allowing rapid troop redeployment anywhere on the moon within minutes. 4 million ground units. And above it, a defense shell so dense that any fleet attempting a direct assault was projected to lose at least 60% of its ships before even reaching deployment range. 60% losses meant failure. That had been the conclusion. Repeated, accepted, filed. The Los Verge was not a target. It was a warning. And now, it was the first objective General Navarro had selected. Ralvek stared at the tactical display when the plan was presented. He had expected support positioning, flank reinforcement, containment roles. Not this. The center approach leads directly through the primary defense grid, he said carefully. Navarro nodded. Yes. They will concentrate all firepower there. Yes. Ralvek held her gaze. That approach is considered non-viable. A pause. Navarro tilted her head slightly. By who? The question wasn't dismissive. It wasn't sarcastic. It was genuine. Ralvek hesitated. By every model we have. Another pause. Navarro looked back at the display. Then your models are based on assumptions that don't apply to us. That was the end of the discussion. The conclave fleets took outer positions. Support roles. Containment arcs. The human fleet took the point. The battle began without ceremony. No countdown. No formal engagement signal. Just movement. Human ships accelerated first. Hard. Directly toward the defense grid. The Narathi swarm responded instantly. Orbital cannons ignited. Missile banks launched in synchronized waves. Point defense systems activated across the entire surface of the Los Verge, creating a lattice of fire so dense it blurred into something almost solid. Ralvek watched from the bridge of the Silent Accord. He had seen this before. He knew what came next. The breaking point, where ships slowed, adjusted, attempted to preserve formation under pressure. The moment hesitation began. It never came. The human fleet did not slow. They didn't adjust into defensive posture. Didn't spread out to minimize losses. They drove straight through. Shields collapsing on forward vessels. A tactical officer reported. No change. Multiple impacts. Hull breaches confirmed. No change. They're not pulling back. I can see that, Ralvek said quietly, because what he was seeing didn't fit anything he had ever studied. A carrier-class vessel took 3 direct hits in rapid succession. His forward shielding failed completely. Outer plating shattered along one side. It should have disengaged. It accelerated instead. Weapons fired in overlapping bursts, precise, controlled, cutting into the defense grid not randomly, but deliberately. They're targeting specific nodes, the tactical officer said, confusion creeping into his voice. Ralvek leaned forward slightly. He saw it now. They're not attacking the grid, he said. A beat. They're carving paths through it. Narrow corridors. Just wide enough. Just long enough. For something to follow. Drop ships. Dozens of them. Falling through the gaps. One of them took a catastrophic hit. Its port engines exploded in a burst of white heat. The vessel lurched sideways, falling out of formation. Ralvek felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Gone. That was what should happen. That was what always happened. But the ship didn't fall. Its remaining engines flared, overcompensating, pushing harder than they should have been able to. The damaged side rotated outward, taking the incoming fire, shielding the 2 ships behind it. Ralvek's eyes widened slightly. It's using itself as cover, someone whispered. The burning transport continued forward, not intact, not stable, but moving, until it broke through the final layer of the defense grid and dropped. The lanes held, barely, just long enough. The rest of the drop ships followed. Ground contact. This was the second impossibility. The tunnels. The swarm's greatest advantage. No fixed front lines. No predictable engagements. Attack from one direction. They emerged from another. Hold position. They came from below. It was chaos. Controlled. Relentless. And it broke most armies that tried to fight it. The humans didn't fight it. They ignored it. Saran watched the ground feed from the tactical interface. At first, he thought it was malfunctioning. The movement patterns didn't make sense. Human units advanced, then split, compressed, then scattered. No consistent formation, no stable front. They're disorganized, he said. No, Ralvek replied, eyes fixed on the display. A beat. They're adapting faster than the tunnels can. The swarm surfaced behind one unit. The humans turned. Engaged. No retreat. Another group was flanked. They didn't fall back. Didn't consolidate. They pushed forward. Through. And then, the moment that would be remembered. A company of 300 human soldiers. Cut off. 6 tunnel breaches. 10,000 swarm units emerging in coordinated formation. Encirclement complete. Saran felt it instantly. This was the end. He had seen this scenario before. Different species. Different battlefields. Same result. Overrun. Eliminated. The signal from the surrounded unit went quiet. 10 seconds. 11. Then, a voice. Calm. Almost amused. All right. They've got us surrounded. A pause. Poor bastards. Saran froze. What? The humans moved. Not inward. Not defensive. Outward. They didn't try to escape the circle. They became it. The unit split into smaller groups. Each one striking a different section of the swarm simultaneously. Not holding ground. Moving through it. Using the tunnels. Using the terrain. Using speed, angles, unpredictability. The swarm tried to compress. But there was nothing to compress against. No center. No fixed resistance. Only movement. Constant. Relentless. 40 minutes. That was all it took. When the signal stabilized again, 219 humans remained. 10,000 swarm units did not. Silence filled the bridge. Not shock. Something deeper. Ralvek leaned back slowly. For the first time since the war began, he understood the warning. Do not let them feel like they are losing, because what he had just witnessed was not survival, not even combat. It was something else. Something the swarm, for all its adaptation, all its intelligence, had never encountered before. Something that did not break when it should have. Something that changed when pressure was applied, and then pushed back harder. The battle for the Los Verge continued for 31 hours. When it ended, the impossible target was gone, and the war had changed forever. The report reached the conclave before the story did. That was unusual. Normally, stories traveled faster than data. Rumors outran facts. Emotion outran analysis. But this time, the numbers arrived first. The Los Verge, 31 hours. 4 million Narathai swarm units neutralized. Primary defense grid destroyed. Subsurface network collapsed. Human losses, significant. But the objective, complete. The Conclave War Council didn't speak for a long time after reading it. Some rechecked projections. Others reopened old models. Every simulation they had ever trusted said the same thing. This should not have been possible. And yet, it had happened. But the numbers weren't the part that spread. The numbers never were. The stories came next. Fragments at first. Then patterns. The burning ship that didn't fall. The soldiers who attacked while surrounded. The units that never stopped moving. And something else. Something harder to define. Something that didn't translate easily into data. Ralvek received Dorothy's full report 3 hours after the battle ended. He read it once, then again, then a third time, not because it was unclear, because it was too clear. I believed they were soldiers, Dorothy had written. I now believe that word is insufficient. Ralvek sat with that sentence for a long time. He had spent his entire life around soldiers, studied them, commanded them, understood them, or at least, he thought he had. He returned to the earlier sections of the report. The observations that hadn't seemed important at first. Humans laughing before battle, naming their weapons, carrying photographs. At the time, they had felt like cultural details. Now, they felt like clues. He opened another file. A historical archive compiled years ago by a line scholar named Fail. The title, On the Domesticated Predator, Humanity and the Illusion of Civilization. Ralvek almost dismissed it. Almost. He began reading. 43 recorded encounters. Different species, different contexts, different outcomes, but the same pattern. Every time. Phase 1, assessment. Humans categorized as manageable, primitive, emotionally unstable. Phase 2, engagement, controlled interaction, limited conflict, strategic pressure. Phase 3, revision. Assessment changes, rapidly, irreversibly. Ralvek leaned back slightly. He had seen that pattern before. Recently, the Los Verge. He continued reading. A trading guild that attempted economic pressure against a human system. The humans didn't resist directly. They adapted, found alternative routes, increased production, then, over time, acquired controlling stakes in the guild's partner networks, turned pressure into leverage, ended the conflict without a single shot. Another account, a military incursion, superior force, better weapons, 8-to-1 advantage. The invading fleet withdrew after 3 days. The human colony remained. No decisive battle recorded. No clear turning point. Just failure. Ralvek felt something shift. This wasn't randomness. It wasn't luck. It was consistency. He reached the final section of Fail's report. A single line stood apart from the rest. They are not dangerous because they are strong. A pause. They are dangerous because they decide what strength is for. Ralvek closed the file slowly. For the first time, he understood the discomfort spreading through the conclave. It wasn't fear of losing the war anymore. That fear was gone. It was something else. They had invited something into the war. Something that didn't behave like anything they understood. Something that chose. Far from the council chambers, Dorothy walked the corridors of the human flagship. Not as an observer anymore, as someone trying to understand. He passed a group of soldiers sitting along the wall. They were laughing. Not loudly, not wildly, just enough. The kind of laughter that came after exhaustion, after survival. One of them noticed him. "Hey!" the soldier said, lifting a hand slightly. Dorothy returned the gesture. He hesitated, then asked, "Why do you laugh after that?" The soldier looked at him for a moment, then shrugged slightly. "Because we're still here." A pause. "And because if we don't laugh," he exhaled, "it gets heavy." Dorothy nodded slowly. That word again. Heavy. Later, he found something else. Something quieter. A small room. Door partially open. Inside, a young human sat at a desk. Writing. On paper. Actual paper. Her shoulders moved slightly. Not from motion. From restraint. She was crying. Silently. Controlled. Contained. Dorothy stepped back. He should leave. Give privacy. But he didn't. Not yet. She finished the letter. Folded it carefully. Set it aside. Then another. And another. Dorothy understood. Letters. To families. When she finished, she wiped her face. Not hurried. Not ashamed. Just practical. She stood. Took 3 slow breaths. Picked up her armor. And walked out. Past him. She didn't stop. Didn't hesitate. Just nodded slightly. And kept moving. Toward the next briefing. Dorothy stood there long after she was gone. He had seen grief before. He had felt it. Among his people, grief stopped you, settled, waited, required time. This was different. He returned to his quarters, opened his report, and wrote, "Among the Kaldar, grief is something that halts action." A pause. "Among humans, it appears to travel with them." He stared at the next line for a long time, trying to find the right words. "It does not weaken them." Another pause. "I believe it becomes part of what moves them forward." He stopped writing, because for the first time, he realized something unsettling. Everything he had been trying to classify, bravery, discipline, aggression, was incomplete. Those weren't the core traits. They were outcomes. The real difference was something deeper. Humans didn't remove fear. They used it, didn't eliminate grief, carried it, didn't avoid pressure, converted it. Dorothy leaned back slowly, searching for the right word. He didn't find one, because it didn't exist. Not yet. Across the galaxy, the Narration swarm was doing the same thing, trying to understand. The hive mind processed the battle, analyzed the data, reconstructed patterns, and found something that didn't fit. Every species had limits, breaking points, moments where pressure forced retreat. It was predictable, measurable, reliable. The swarm had evolved around that certainty. Find the limit, push past it, win. But the new combatant did not behave that way. The more pressure applied, the more unpredictable it became. Not weaker, not disorganized, different. The hive mind attempted classification, ran comparative models, referenced known behavioral frameworks. Nothing matched, so it did something unprecedented. It created a new category, a new definition. When conclave intelligence later decoded it, the translation came out roughly as entities that do not acknowledge termination conditions. Ralvek read that translation in silence, then closed the file, because for the first time, he realized something even more dangerous than the swarm. Not what humans were, but what they had chosen to be. This wasn't instinct. It wasn't biology. It was decision. And decisions could change. That was the part that stayed with him. Long after the battle, long after the reports, long after the stories spread. Because strength could be measured, predictable. But choice meant uncertainty. And uncertainty was the only thing in the galaxy more dangerous than the swarm. The war didn't end in a moment. It ended in a silence. Not the quiet of peace. Not the calm after victory. Something stranger. Something the galaxy had never experienced before. It began with a question. The signal appeared across every frequency at once. Every language. Every known translation framework. Origin. Deep within the core system of the Narration swarm. The source. The queen. The transmission was short. No threat. No demand. No attempt to negotiate. Just a question. What are you? It wasn't afraid. That was what unsettled everyone who heard it. The tone carried no fear. No anger. Only confusion. Something ancient. Something that had consumed civilizations for centuries. Had encountered something it did not understand. General Navarro received the signal on the bridge of the steadfast resolve. She stood still for a moment. Not long, just long enough to think. Or maybe, to decide. She didn't respond privately. She opened the channel, to everyone. Human fleet, conclave forces, every ship within range. If this moment mattered, then it would be shared. She stepped forward slightly, looked at the display, at the question, and answered, "We're the ones you made the mistake of threatening first." No speech, no declaration, no attempt to explain, just truth. Simple, final. The channel closed. The silence that followed felt heavier than any battle. Then, the final assault began. The conclave fleets held the outer defense layers, drawing fire, breaking formations. Ships burned, exploded, fell. But they held. The human fleet drove inward, directly toward the planet. Ralvek stood on the bridge as the battle unfolded. He had seen impossible things already. The Los Verge, the encircled company. But this was different. Because now, he understood what he was watching. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't recklessness. This was intent. Every movement, every loss, every push forward. Chosen. The surface assault began at first light. Drop ships cut through the atmosphere under heavy fire. Many didn't make it. Enough did. The ground war was worse than anything before. The Narathai swarm fought differently here. Not faster, not smarter, but harder. Every unit resisted until destruction. No retreat, no repositioning. As if the Queen itself was forcing a final stand. Human casualties climbed. Ralvek watched the numbers update. Felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not fear. Not doubt. Wait, these were not abstract units. Not projections. He had met them. Shared rooms. Heard their laughter. Seen them carry grief like armor. And now, he was watching them fall. He didn't look away. He had learned something from them. Looking away wasn't respect. Witnessing was. The final push toward the Queen's chamber took 11 hours. Tunnel by tunnel. Meter by meter. No shortcuts. No collapse. Just movement. Forward. Always forward. When the breach finally came, it wasn't dramatic. No explosion. No grand entrance. Just a wall giving way. And humans stepping through it. The Queen's chamber was vast. Ancient. Its walls layered with growth patterns older than most civilizations. And at its center, the source, the command unit, the mind behind the swarm. For the first time, it was visible. And for the first time, it was still. There was no final speech, no last attempt at resistance, because the question had already been asked and answered. The war ended there, not with a strike, but with a cessation. The moment the Queen died, the swarm changed, not immediately, but visibly. Across systems, units stopped, not retreating, not attacking, just stopping, disconnected from the thing that had told them what they were. On the surface, human soldiers encountered them, weapons raised, then paused. They weren't enemies anymore. Not really. Just empty. One soldier moved to fire. Navarro's voice cut through the channel. Stand down. A pause. Stand down. The weapon lowered. There had been arguments before this moment. Destroy the planet. Ensure nothing remained. Eliminate the threat completely. It would have been logical, efficient, safe. Navarro had made a different decision. She stood in the chamber, looking at what remained of the enemy, and said quietly, "We end wars." A pause. "We don't become what we fought." Those words spread, faster than any report, faster than any story, because they answered something the galaxy hadn't known how to ask. What humans were. The aftermath was not simple. Wars never are. Systems had to be stabilized. Remnants contained. Decisions made about what to do with what remained of the swarm. There were disagreements, mistakes, failures, but the war was over. 1 year later, Ralvek published his final report. It was shorter than anyone expected. He had learned something from humans. The most important things didn't need to be long. The conclusion read, "We searched for monsters and found enemies." A pause. "We called for help and found something else." Another pause. "Not a weapon. Not an ally. A choice." Ralvek stopped there for a moment before writing the final lines. Carefully, because they mattered. They are the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. Not because they lack limits, but because they decide where those limits are. And because, he paused, thinking of the Los Verge, the burning ship, the surrounded soldiers, the girl writing letters. They chose to place those limits in the service of something other than conquest. The final line was the one everyone remembered. "The only reason we are still here is that they decided we were worth protecting." Years later, Navarro stood in a quiet garden on Earth. No war, no command deck, just soil, Living things. Growth. A young envoy approached her. Nervous. Careful. Holding a document. An invitation. Full conclave membership. Not allies. Not temporary partners. Equals. Navarro read it slowly, then folded it, looked up, and smiled. A real smile. Not the one soldiers learned to recognize. A human one. We thought you'd never ask. And that was how the galaxy survived the war. Not because it found something stronger than the enemy, but because it found something that could choose not to be.